So this one's gonna go to Gabe Townsell. Gabe, has there ever been a time where your culture has affected your wrestling experience?
Still muted, I think. Okay, there we go. I was saying, I think that's something that these guys have already touched on in various ways. And entering the sport of wrestling, there's this necessary distance between cultures in a lot of cases. You don't necessarily feel that distance unless you need to, but there's a difference in how close teammates who look alike tend to get relative to how close they will get to us, and how much they'll be willing to understand certain cultures in a lot of cases. And I have two examples that come to mind when I'm thinking about either the culture of teams specifically, or even the culture of the sport as a whole in reaction to uh, Black people succeeding. Um, so in high school, I went to Oak Park and River Forest High School. We were coached by Mike Powell. A lot of people are familiar with that program as of right now. But at that point in time, we had some solid guys. We hadn't been as good as we ended up. I mean, guys like Sammy Brooks have gone there, Ellis Coleman, LaShawn Coleman. We've had successful people in the past, even as far as Pete Schulte. But like the team in the past uh, was a majority white team. We were in the suburbs of Chicago, and a couple of my friends and I, we all came to Oak Park at the same time, regardless of uh, where we had been planning to go before. For whatever reasons, we all ended up in the same place, and because of that, immediately there were 4 Black wrestlers on our team who had been succeeding at the grade school level, who were targets all of a sudden. Our addresses were being posted on message boards. There was a suspicion that Coach Powell was buying an apartment for all of us to live in. We just had to be moving in from out of district with the intention of cheating. There's no way that we could have lived in those suburbs on a team that had in the past been predominantly white. And I can think of a couple times where that really impacted how my day-to-day went. One of which was that there was a residency officer who would come to the residences to see if there were people who were moving in from out of district. He was a former FBI officer. He's since been fired for doing exactly this. I lived with my dad's high school coach and his wife. My dad's high school coach was the closest thing that my dad had to a dad. But for all intents and purposes, I needed to get out of the neighborhood I was in for a lot of reasons. There was a lot of gun violence in the neighborhood. People had attempted to rob me. I've been shot at. But I also knew that there was no wrestling in the city of Chicago outside of private schools, and I wanted to end up someplace, end up at a skill level where I could take my talents to the college level. So I moved out of the house from my family, and they came to assess it when I was going to live there. I had already moved in some of my clothes. I'd moved in pictures, that type of stuff. And the officer comes in, and this house that my dad's high school coach and his wife lived in, if it's sold now, it would sell for north of $1 million. It's modeled after the Frank Lloyd Wright houses that are in the same neighborhood. But when this officer came in, he said that the conditions were unlivable. It was clear that no one had ever lived there, and that it was very obvious that I wasn't living in district and was just using their address. And so I would get a letter every day that said I didn't live in district. And like I said, they had posted our actual addresses as being places that they were suspicious of being funded by our coaches on message boards. And so we would have workouts as early as 7 a.m, and there would be private investigators hired by parents from other teams across the state who would be following us to our workouts to make sure that we were walking to school. So there would be a couple times I would just zigzag to make sure they were following me, and of course they were. And so those sorts of things, it made me wonder why it was that people could go to powerhouse teams like Montini Catholic from everywhere, other states even. But when it came to us, these 4 Black individuals, there was so much scrutiny that even the rest of our team was subject to it. People who had been there already before the wave of us had transferred in were under this magnifying glass, such that their addresses were being posted on the internet for everyone to see. It's dangerous in a lot of cases. And the fact that people knew where we lived to follow us, I'm 14 years old and I don't know anybody in the district. It's a scary thing to have to deal with. And the second instance that I can think of is later. As I mentioned earlier, there is that cultural distance that comes with coming from a place where um, you're used to being around a certain people who understand your experience. Even just being in Chicago, whether it was around people who were Black or not, there was an understanding of the Black Chicago experience. And um, there's an amount of culture shock that comes with even coming to a place like Oak Park, but then going to a place like Stanford. Um, it was pretty clear to me that there weren't very many people who could understand facets of my culture that were, specific to how I came up. One example that I can think of off the top of my head was we were about to wrestle in a duel in San Diego, the Battle of the Midway. And at the time we were in Bakersfield, I get a text on my phone that says that one of my friends has been shot and killed in a safe part of Chicago, and he had been shot 14 times. Another one of my grade school friends had gotten shot in New York, and one of my club team coaches had just passed with two of his kids who still wrestled in high school. And I got all of those texts around the same time from different people. And I actually saw the video on Twitter of my friend getting shot, and I I had to take that trauma with me, move forward, and compete the next day. And once it was clear that something was different, um, I told everyone that I had suffered this loss, and that it was weighing on me at some capacity. But the only way that I could find it within myself to move forward was to imagine the fact that they were looking down on me about to see me compete, and they would have wanted to see me do well. So the next day we wrestled a duel in the Midway, and I blast double the kid in the first couple seconds, and then after that let him go, and I hit him with a cement mixer. I pinned him in the first period, and everyone's patting me on the back. Everyone's congratulating me. The whole crowd is going up. I have this chance to celebrate this, posted over social media on all these different places. It's it goes viral for all intents and purposes within the wrestling community. And no one who had seen me suffering could even understand that that was something that would extend beyond that moment, because there weren't people who would come from places where they could lose friends to gun violence. And that wasn't a part of their culture. They didn't understand that there was an amount of weight that came with living in a place where it's more likely for you to have friends who are dead. And over the course of the year, or the last 540 days or so, I lost 11 more. Well, not 11 more from that day, but I lost 10 more friends than those three. And 7 of them were violent, all of them by gun violence, 2 by police. And all of those came with these experiences that no one around me could understand. I could only connect to people by going home. And it would be a single conversation where condolences were offered, and then I was back to work the next day. And so those sorts of things made it very difficult for me to really conceptualize the fact that I was different from other people, to the extent that where I came from was changing the way that I lived my life on a day-to-day basis. But the expectation was that I was to move forward like everyone else who would experience none of those things. And so yeah, those are 2 distinct experiences I can think of where even on the message boards there would be people saying like objectively racist things, and I can't remember all of them. They were hurtful. Like my parents had to fight to stay off those message boards, to fight for us. And those are things that shape the way that you view people within the sport, the way that you have to think about parents of people you're wrestling, even the people you're wrestling. And on top of that, there are these experiences that I specifically am going through by myself that only people who grew up like me know how to relate to. So yeah, those are the 2 experiences that come to mind when I think of how my culture specifically has impacted the way I view the sport.